The Cleveland Cavaliers select Evan Mobley.
Has been a historical franchise in this league for years.
We have a trade to announce. The Boston Celtics select Jason Tatum.
That's become a very important day on the NBA calendar. Basketball basically all day. Celtics have already played today, and they won. So that's always a good thing in these parts here. So that's makes for a nice afternoon. And then, yeah, I mean, we get games going on all day today. It's a great day on the NBA calendar. And I said on Twitter earlier for our friends over in Europe, this is great because they get to actually watch basketball at a somewhat normal hour instead of the middle of the night and those kind of things. So yeah, all good. But yeah, trade talks picking up all over the league. So let's dive in.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with some of the big names that have been out there, have been coming from the Pacers side of things. We talk about Myles Turner, Caris LeVert being out there, Domantas Sabonis. Feels like it's more shifting towards him staying in Indiana, at least based on what the recent rumors have suggested. But we saw a rumor coming from Hoopsite. Michael Scotto said that we've got a little intel here on what the asking price is. And according to him, from the Pacers side, what they're looking for, if they're going to trade Myles Turner, is 2 first-round picks or a very promising young player and a first. So we need to talk about Caris LeVert as well, but let's start with Myles Turner there. What are your thoughts on that particular asking price, knowing, of course, that doesn't mean that's what they're going to get, but interesting starting point from the Pacers side.
Yeah, and kind of coming into this with the mindset of you always ask high because you can always come down. You can't always go back up in a conversation. I think Myles Turner is very much a eye of the beholder type player. If you need what he does, you're probably willing to go get him and give a decent return for him. If you don't need what he does, then that becomes a little bit more of a, is this really worth giving up a whole lot for a guy like Turner? Contractually, he's under contract for an extra year. So you would get him the remainder of this season and next year at $18 million. So that's a perfectly fine number for what Myles Turner does. And I think folks who listen here and watch this show know I'm not a massive Myles Turner guy. I just don't, I don't think he's the shooter people think he is. He's not a 40+% knockdown 3-point shooter. He's basically a spot up guy who makes around 35% from 3, which is good for a big, but not great. He doesn't really rebound all that well, but his shot blocking is very, very good. So I get why teams would be interested, and I understand why the Pacers are saying, hey, we are not rebuilding. This is not a tear this all the way down, because otherwise it would be Turner and Sabonis versus Turner or Sabonis. Right. I do think Turner has taken the forefront in the trade talks because he's just simply easier to plug and play into a new team versus what Sabonis would be. You'd have to really tweak your offense quite a bit to incorporate him. But yeah, my guess is they're not going to get that much. It's two first round picks. Maybe you get a first and then a very heavily protected second first. That'll ultimately probably turn into 2 seconds. Maybe that's where this goes. Or maybe you get a player, but a promising young player or a very high upside young player. I don't know that you're going to get both of those things for Myles Turner.
Yeah, I think, and again, it depends on the player. And even when we talk about a promising young player, well, like you said, even with Turner, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah. So it depends on how that particular team feels about that young player and how the Pacers feel about that young player as well. There's obviously going to be some differing opinions on a number of different young players around the NBA, and exactly what very promising means, well, that's subjective. So we'll see what winds up happening here. I do think it's a good starting point. I agree. I don't think they get that. But the only thing giving me a little bit of pause here is that this market is very much a seller's market because there's not that many of them. Yeah, there's not that many teams right now that are selling, and that is in part a byproduct of this new-ish, I guess, anyway. We had it yet last year, but the play-in system where you have a play-in tournament, you have more teams that are looking at things saying, you know what, we're not that far out from being a playoff team or a play-in team at least. We can make a little bit of noise. Let's hold off on selling pieces, where in years past, a team that's sitting in 11th place or whatever is probably in sell mode right now. So that's something to consider as well.
part down
Sure.
just a little bit. And this is factoring in a couple results already from today. Again, we're recording this Monday afternoon, and there are a couple games have already finished. But as of right now, so let's look at the East. The Celtics are in 10th, so that final playoff spot in the East at 23 and 22. The Knicks are behind them by a half game. They flip-flopped positions today. And then the Hawks have now fallen 4.5 out of the 10 seed, which that's kind of starting to get to danger time there. And then the Pacers, Pistons, Magic, they're all well behind. 7 games for the Pacers, and the Pistons, Magic can't even see the play-in from where they are. So that is a little bit more defined in the East. In the West, though, Portland is in 10th in the final playoff, play-in spot, rather. And you can go all the way down to Oklahoma City in 14th, and they're only 3 games behind the Blazers. And there's no real sense that Portland is going to continue to push. They're, as we've talked about many times, a team people are watching. And then I don't know how anyone could look at the kind of grouping of Kings, Spurs, Pelicans, Thunder and say, yeah, there's the team. That's the one who's going to, full on go for it. So you're right. It has made a weird, look at what does this look like from this. And if you're the Pacers, if you could be an early mover by, selling off Turner, LeVert, we're going to talk about him in a minute, maybe a couple other pieces like Justin Holiday, things like that. You may be able to generate a bigger return because, as you said, it's a seller's market. And because there's so few sellers, buyers may be more motivated to overpay to get guys like that. So that does have to factor in here in a major way. So yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, it may behoove the Pacers rather than taking this all the way down to the deadline, because what's going to change for them? They're 7 games out of the play-in.
Exactly.
You're not getting any closer. And then the other thing is what may change is more sellers coming into this, because right now, look at the teams behind them. Detroit, maybe Jeremy Grant, right? We're hearing some noise about him. But Orlando's not doing a ton of selling. They've got a couple veterans that maybe they might lose. Yeah, and Houston, let's take John Wall off the table, but, maybe a couple guys there, DJ Augustine. But those are guys that are going to return minimal. So if you're the Pacers, you may have a couple of the better players on the market. It may really be able to make some.
Well, and we'll do something soon, fully breaking down. It's not quite defined yet, but pretty soon we'll need to do something breaking down sellers versus buyers and kind of putting the teams into different buckets here.
Sure.
But you're right. Yeah, the Pacers, it might behoove them to make a move sooner before the trade deadline rather than waiting all the way up until the deadline, because it's possible that just more assets could get pulled off the market, other deals could get done, and more teams could jump into it as sellers. So certainly something to factor in. Interesting though, for Caris LeVert, again, coming from Hoopsite, the word is that they're looking for a first and a young player. And I think what's interesting is the language there, because in the Myles Turner side, it was a first and a promising young player. And then for Caris LeVert, it's a first and a young player. So I think that's interesting. Contractually, they're pretty similar, fairly close, Myles Turner and Caris LeVert, but interesting that it's just a young player, not necessarily a promising young player for Caris LeVert.
I think that's kind of pegging the value right on the two players. I think Turner's a more valuable player, and that seems weird to say because he's a big and LeVert's a wing and everybody's looking for wings. But Caris LeVert, he's a good player, but he can be a very inefficient player. It's tough to peg what is his value on a very, very good team. It may be better off to be a coming off the bench kind of guy, or a guy who he starts, but his real role is when you go into those reserve units, he's the guy who sticks and he kind of keys what your reserves do. That may be the better spot to look at for Caris LeVert. But yeah, I mean, he's a good player. He's just not somebody you're going to be, kind of going head over heels to, pay a ton for. But again, if he ends up one of the best wings on the market, well, somebody's going to go get him, because there are teams that, well, not that there are teams that need wing help, but every team is always looking for an extra wing, especially one who can put the ball in the hoop. And much like Turner, if you really like him, he's got an additional year under contract at 18.8 million for next season. So that's a guy you can say, well, we got him for the rest of this year and next year, which then that kind of becomes in both of these cases. It's almost like, hey, we did our free agent shopping,
Exactly.
a couple months early.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that teams will have to factor in as well. I think it's weird though saying it, but it feels like it's easier to fit Myles Turner into a lot of teams than it is necessarily to fit Caris LeVert. And it's because of that inefficient shooting. He's only shooting 31% or so from three. So for a lot of teams, that would be that's going to cause some problems. And so I like Caris LeVert as a player. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but just I understand why Myles Turner might carry a little bit more value than Caris LeVert would.
Yeah, I continue to believe the best fit for Caris LeVert is Cleveland. Yes. I just think that's the team that can use him the most. I think he fills a lot of needs there. I think he's a guy who becomes, you could trade Ricky Rubio as a salary match, and then, whatever you need to plus that up with, you figure that out as you go. But yeah, he's the guy I think that they should be targeting. They have been mentioned as linked to him. I don't know how much that is people like us that are kind of putting two and two together versus real noise. But we'll see. Interesting. Caris LeVert once was maybe thought to be going to the Houston Rockets, and a trade in the Rockets also out here, searching for a trade for Eric Gordon.
Yeah.
And I think Eric Gordon played at Indiana. So how's that for linking all that together?
Oh, look at that
segue. So yeah, it's Eric Gordon on the block. The Rockets. This one seems ambitious.
A first.
They would like a first round pick for Eric Gordon. Now, I thought that was a little crazy till I started looking at his numbers, and man, he's playing pretty good. But,
here's the thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right? Like Eric Gordon, this is what gets me. If I'm a team and I'm trading for Eric Gordon, I'm looking at his numbers and they're great. And if I'm the Rockets, I am putting those in a neon sign and saying, look at these numbers. Give us a first round pick for him. Let's go. Right. But 46% from three, 15 points per game right now. That's incredible efficiency. His efficiency is so high that if I'm in another team, I don't buy it. I don't buy that's sustainable, because otherwise we're talking about, is Eric Gordon essentially the best 3-point shooter in the NBA? I know PJ Tucker, technically his 3-point percentage is higher right now, but is Eric Gordon the best 3-point shooter in the NBA, or the best 3-point shooting guard in the NBA? He's very good, but I don't know if I want to pay the price to assume that's what he's going to be moving forward. That's my holdup if I'm another team trading for Eric Gordon. Then you add in the fact that he's 33 years old. I think the Rockets are right to ask for a first-round pick, but I would definitely hesitate if I was another team looking to deal for him if that's the price.
Yeah, so you mentioned his age, 33. I'll mention his injury history is pretty long. So you have to factor that in. And then you have to factor in, unlike Turner and LeVert, who are young enough where you're like, hey, we get these guys an extra year. He's on the books for an extra year at $19.6 million. Plus, if you're a really, really good team and you think Eric Gordon is launching you into the NBA Finals, that final year in 23-24 at $20.9 million becomes fully guaranteed if you win the title. Now, people are going to bring this up. We get brought up with Al Horford. People are going to wonder about this as well with Eric Gordon is, well, it says if Houston wins the championship, that does transfer to whatever team he is on. Okay. It is not locked in Rockets. It is whatever team Eric Gordon is on. So I think what you have to do if you're a team is clearly you trade winning a title for paying him $21 million a couple of years from now. You don't really care about that. You just have to really factor in is, do we think we can get a good rest of this season and a good part of the year next year out of Eric Gordon? If we do, then maybe, not to beat a dead horse here, but if he's one of the best guards available on the market, go. I think, again, another guy, pretty easy plug and play in just about any team. You can put him out there and say, hey, just do your thing, shoot and score. And what we always say about guys like this is where he's almost the opposite of LeVert, right? LeVert's putting up numbers, but does it fairly inefficiently rather. Gordon is shooting over 50% from the field, or 46% from three. So, and he's, got a decent amount of assists for a guy who's really a scorer. And let's factor in, he's doing it on a team that is not great and not exactly filled with amazing spacing. either. So that's where I look at it and say, boy, if you told me a year ago, I'd be here kind of campaigning and saying, yeah, I could kind of see kind of going in on Eric Gordon. I would have been like, that's insane. I'll never say that, but yet here we are. And I feel like, maybe this is it. But to your point, you have to really feel confident this is going to continue. Otherwise, this one could turn sideways on you really, really quick.
And this is, we talked about this, I believe it was last show with Tim Hardaway Jr. This is another player that is, their value is very tied to their percentages. Yep. Eric Gordon for his career is a 37% 3-point shooter. Last season, he shot 33%. Season before that, he shot 32%. Now he's at 46%. You have to buy that he's suddenly that much better of a 3-point shooter than what he showed for his career. And I just don't, he's done this. He did it once in New Orleans.
Yeah, let's
he
go back.
45% back in 2014, 2015. Yeah. But again, you have to buy that this is going to be sustainable. And maybe it is. I hope it is. I don't dislike him as a player, but just it's a buyer beware situation. Now, if the cost is a little bit lower, if they come off of that and it's you need to give a guy a decent prospect or something and like a second rounder, okay, all right, maybe we can start talking about something like that. But when it's a first round pick, and obviously not all first round picks are the same, but if it's a first, it just feels like it's a bit ambitious, and I would be concerned if I was the team paying that price.
Yeah, and I don't know that I'm giving up a fully unprotected first round pick. And I don't know if I'm a team that's, in the 7 to 12 range in the conference and I'm just trying to make a playoff push. I don't know that I'm necessarily jumping in there because, unless I feel like, I'm falling apart. If I'm the Atlanta Hawks, for example, I don't know that I'm giving up a whole bunch to go get like Eric Gordon because I just don't know that makes sense from their standpoint where that may not even be enough to lift you to where you want to go. But if I'm one of the good teams, if I'm one of the kind of top 4, 5, 6 teams in each conference, and I feel like I'm pretty good, and I'm going to give up a pick but maybe what you do is you top 20 protected so that if you fall apart late here, you're kind of protected. But I'd give up the 21st to 30th pick in this year's draft. That's if fair. I could. That seems to make sense. And I will say the last 2 years have been a mess for him. He has not shot it well. He's barely played. He played 36 games in the 1920 season, 27 games in 2021. I think there was a sense of what are we going to push him to play for? But the years prior to that, with split between New Orleans and Houston, I mean, he shot the heck out of the ball from behind the arc. It's oddly in those years he'd really kind of transitioned into becoming almost solely a 3-point shooter, and he shot about 38% over that 6-year stretch from deep. So that's pretty good. And then this year, now he's become a little bit more. He's getting inside, scoring a little more in the mid-range, getting to the basket a little bit more. So that I do think, does, kind of have to factor in a little bit here. So yeah, I think it's, as you said, not all first round picks are created to equal. So let's see what that looks like. But it's starting to look like maybe he's one of the better options out there. And, if you feel like, hey, we can do this again, because pretty easy plug and play, can come off the bench, can do some stuff. Actually, surprisingly, he holds his own defensively, I think, better than people give him credit for.
Yeah, he's strong.
He's not a good defender. I'm not going to go that far, but and again, I feel weird kind of campaigning for Eric Gordon because I never thought I'd be here at this point, especially on that contract. But yeah, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a late first, okay, I could see that. It's more thinking like an unprotected at some point. Like that's where we'll go.
That's probably too much. Yeah. Like, and then if you're giving up an unprotected first, you better be really confident you're a good team.
Absolutely.
That's not going to worry about it.
We've talked a lot about how the Spurs don't do deals mid-season, and now we've got another player, Bryn Forbes. The Nuggets are apparently interested in working something out for him. The Spurs don't appear to be making a playoff push or anything like that, or worrying too much about that. So might the streak here be broken, or the trend break here and the Spurs make a move mid-season? We've already heard Thad Young, and now Bryn Forbes, potentially a guy who's out there.
Yep, and I think the difference with those two guys is two veterans that are on expiring contracts. The Spurs aren't often sitting in that position. They tend to either have young guys or they have veterans who are locked up for multiple years. It's kind of rare for them to be in this spot. So I kind of don't there was a report that the Raptors are interested in Jakob Poeltl,
Yep.
that we talked about. I don't know that I'm necessarily think the Spurs will move Jakob Poeltl. I don't think that makes a lot of sense for them. But that young Bryn Forbes, that does make sense there. And I think this is where you do kind of break your trend of we don't really do in-season deals, because it's really hard to see how trading either one of those guys really comes back to bite you. Whereas if you could trade Pirtle, he could go on and play great. You could be a pretty good team next year and be sitting there saying, you know what, we really need a defensive anchor in the paint. And now you're like, man, we should have just kept Pirtle. I don't think they're going to be finding themselves pining for Thad Young or Bryn Forbes. Forbes with the Nuggets having interest in Bryn Forbes, that one makes some sense. It was interesting just the other day. They came out and a couple different people there said, including Nikola Jokic, everybody knows we can't make a shot, and they are not a great shooting team. They're in the bottom half, and they're trending lower as things go here now.
I would disagree. Based on what we just saw, I would disagree with that.
Yeah, I think you have a different perspective, but I think the numbers tell us that was maybe the outlier.
Like halfway through the game, I'm not kidding, they were shooting 75% from three. The Nuggets were. That was their legit stat, and I'm not talking like first quarter. This was like, I think we were in like the third quarter, and they were shooting 75% from three. No, this was on high volume. It was.
Yeah, I want to say they were like 12 of 16 or something like that, right? It was pretty high. Yeah, but the reality is they have struggled to shoot it this year, and Forbes would make sense there, because you could really kind of throw him in, play him as long as you have a real ball handler on the floor. So you'd have to have Boris or Campazzo out there with him, have him just kind of run around, play off Jokic, and get open, and you've got enough defensively to protect him too. So that in 4.5 million, that's a number very easily that you could go get if you're Denver. And that's the Nuggets sounds like they're going to get Jamal Murray and maybe Michael Porter Jr. back this year. You add Forbes to that group. All of a sudden, that looks like a pretty dangerous playoff team.
Oh yeah, that's the team that you don't want to see, I think, if you're one of the top tier teams in the West. We've got some other moves to get into, some more minor things here, but for example, the Lakers give Stanley Johnson another 10-day contract. We know they like him. His minutes haven't been quite as high over the last 3 games, but another 10-day deal for him. This is it. This is the last 10-day contract that he can get. He did have one on a hardship contract, and so now he's had 3 consecutive 10-day contracts, which normally can't happen, but one was a hardship deal. So one more 10-day contract, and then the Lakers will have to decide what they want to do. Do they want to use their open roster spot to sign him for the remainder of the season, or do they want to part ways and do something else? We'll see.
Yeah, and that extra one is only allowable right now. We're going to talk about another guy who was on 3 10-day hardship deals. It's only allowable because they decided these hardship ones don't count as like they regularly would, just because they were trying to get teams through that COVID period in December, which this wasn't a show topic, but just to touch on it, looks like we're pretty well through the woods on that, at least for players. Coaches continue to go down, including the Orlando Magic. Coach Jamal Mosley, and then I believe it's Nate Tibbetts, his lead assistant, are both in the health and safety protocols now. So, and I think that's Mosley makes the 17th head coach to go in the protocols. Which, I mean, if players are going down, it serves, you got to believe the coaches would as well. But yeah, so that's why Johnson was able to do a third 10-day with the Lakers, and then this one, much like the prior one, these do count against the luxury tax and all that for the Lakers as well. So, so they're going to have a decision to make in, a week and a half here. Do we want to keep him? Do we want to, move in a different direction with an open roster spot, or what does it look like? So, let's see, if he continues to play and play a decent amount, I'm sure they'll do what they can to try to keep him around.
Absolutely. Speaking of keeping a guy around, the Mavs have decided to waive Willie Cauley-Stein in order to sign Marquise Chris, who came in on a 10-day deal and performed well. And so now there it is. He earned himself a roster spot.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked about Willie Cauley-Stein. Will the team
Yeah,
claim him on waivers
right.
because it's only a $4.1 million contract? So there are a lot of teams that have the ability to do that. Or, should a team really look at signing him? And it's not that Willie Cauley-Stein is necessarily a bad player or anything. He just has not played in over a month now. We're getting close to a month and a half. He's been out with personal
I was
reasons.
gonna say, do we
There's
know what the story is
no,
there
there's
yet?
been no reporting as to why either, which has me worried from the standpoint of hope everything is
Yes.
okay for him in his
Mm-hmm.
life. And because of that, that's where I just kind of have to say shrug, and I don't know, if he's, somebody you can sign. Maybe this is one where in another month or so, or maybe he waits and now sits and kind of waits to see what happens at the trade deadline and buyouts, and then picks a destination and he's ready to go from there. I do know this is not a personal situations like why Ben Simmons is being ruled out for
Mm-hmm.
personal reasons on a nightly basis, where he just doesn't want to be there, and everybody knows what that story is. There is something going on because the team has expressed support for him and said they would continue to support him even though he's no longer on the roster. So that's a very long way of saying I don't think he gets claimed, and I don't think anybody signs him right away. And then Marquise Chris, good for him. He's played well for them. They need a kind of big with some bounce and some energy. That's not something their other bigs necessarily give them, on any kind of regular basis. So, he parlayed that into a 2-year minimum contract, playing well on that hardship deal.
Yeah. And Ben Simmons is saying mental health too.
Sure.
That's what it, but it's fair. It's understandable
Yes.
if people are skeptical of
Yeah.
how legit that is. I think that's a fair
Yeah.
thing to
No,
consider.
it's a good point. Thank you.
The Heat are signing Kyle Guy. Decided he's their guy, and they're gonna stick with him. Again, you know what? We said this was going to be the silver lining of all of this, all the COVID stuff that was going around, all these hardship players coming in, replacements, all that sort of stuff. The silver lining is guys who may not have gotten a chance otherwise are going to get a chance, and some of those guys are going to seize the opportunity, and we can say the same thing about Stanley Johnson, and they're going to find jobs in the NBA as a result of this. And that's always cool to see.
In his 6 games with the Heat, Guy averaged 8.2 points per game. Came basically as doing what he came into the league with the rep as is shoot the ball. 51% in those 6 games from the field, 45% from 3 on 3.3 3-point attempts. Normally, I would say 6 games. I'm not gonna give this a whole heck of a lot.
Right.
Except this is the Miami Heat, who a few years ago this was Duncan Robinson. Not really highly regarded guy, came in very, very late in the season with the Heat, and then now developed into one of the best shooters in the league. Max Strus, a guy who came in on a 2-way contract, with Miami, not really overly regarded, is now starting games for Miami on a regular basis and really shooting the lights out this year. The Heat have gotten an awful lot out of their 2-way players. So before this, normally I would be like, I'm not going to think a whole lot of this because of the situation there. This is one to keep an eye on and continue to monitor, because there's, I'd say, a better than even chance that Kyle Guy turns into something, just given Miami's track record with those guys at the back end of the roster.
True. Yeah, absolutely. They've got this.
Omer Yurtseven now looks like a legit starting center in the NBA. Not an all-star or anything, but a legit starting center. And he's a guy who wasn't, kind of on anybody's radar, even a few months ago.
Well, might as well mention it now, I guess. Won't be a legit starting center for much longer, because it sounds like Bam Adebayo is back. He is questionable for tonight's game, and that's great news. Great, obviously, you want to see Bam back out there on the floor.
Little ahead of schedule too, I think, because I think it was supposed to be more towards the end of this month. So that's why they give you those 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks ranges, I guess. And it does tend to be in the NBA because everybody's cautious, especially with guys signed long term. But Bam going to get back, and I don't want to be this way about it, but the Heat are, they're not pushing him back to play because they don't really need to, because they just keep winning games.
Yeah.
They just, it's almost like, I want to see what they do if they plug me and you into the rotation, if they would just continue to rip off wins or what. Like, it kind of feels that way.
I can promise they would not. If they that would not happen. No, we would get burned. We would get run out of town, Miami. Like, before we could even play more than a minute or two on the floor, I'm pretty sure Heat fans would forcibly remove us. They would probably, in fact, at least for me, they would rather play 5-on-4 than 5-on-5 with me being one of their fives.
Yeah, they'd be afraid, like, I would stumble and fall into one of their guys and hurt them. Something. It would literally be, you run to the corner and you just, it is funny whenever, I used to say when I was like, even as late as high school, I was like, an NBA team could pay me nothing and I'd just sit at the end of their bench, and they'd be happy. And then I learned, like, oh, well, there are minimum contracts, and there are literally hundreds of thousands of basketball players in the world that are more suited to go get a minimum contract than I would ever have been in my life.
Oh, reality. It hits you hard.
It does.
We do have one more to get to for this episode here, and that's the Bulls signing Malcolm Hill. And so they've picked him up.
Yep.
We do, by the way, I still have a lot more to get to, but we're going to do that a little bit later today.
Yeah, and Malcolm Hill is a guy who, he was up with the Hawks earlier on a hardship 10-day, was with the Bulls on a hardship. What's kind of going on right now is they eliminated, it used to be January 15th was the last day to sign a player to a 10-day contract. This year, again, trying to give teams increased roster flexibility due to COVID and the like, that's been eliminated. You can sign two-way players all the way up to the end of the year. But today was the last day to waive a two-way player before their two-way contract became fully guaranteed for the rest of the year. So we've seen some two-way movement over the last week or so, really related to that deadline. And what the Bulls did was they waived Devin Dotson, two-way guard. Chicago has all kinds of guard depth when healthy, and we're going to get into some of their injury issues in the next episode. But where we're at with this one is then Malcolm Hill comes in and gives them a wing size player, another guy who's about 6'6" or so, can play the 2 or the 3 and really kind of hold his own.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a team that has dealt with, well, quite a bit of health and safety protocols and injuries and things of that nature, but a guy that gives them a little bit of depth. And as you said, we're going to talk about it on the next segment here, exactly what's going on with them injury-wise. So that is coming up. Appreciate everybody joining us for this video. Be on the lookout for the next one. We're going to talk about some injury stuff. We're also going to talk about something going on with the 76ers, something Joel Embiid said that might matter big time in the Ben Simmons trade negotiation. Maybe not, but we'll get into it. A lot of other things to break down, so be on the lookout for that video coming later today. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. Make sure you do subscribe to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications as well. So appreciative of everybody who's been following this channel. If you listen to the podcast version, make sure you do subscribe over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you do listen to podcasts. Till next time, everybody, stay safe and see you.